3, 2, 1.
Research. Innovate.
Educate. This is RTP. This is RTP180.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to RTP180. I am your MC, Wade Minter, coming to you not from the frontier, which is where I've been holed up for the last year and a half or so, but from the top of Lombard Street in beautiful San Francisco. That's right, I am on a family vacation, but just like Wu-Tang is for the children, RTP180 is for the people, and I am here with you virtually on my family vacation. Don't tell my family. But that's a shot from my vacation yesterday. But now I'm here with you at RTP 180. And gosh golly, I am glad to be here. Now, RTP 180 is brought to you by a couple of fine folks. Our presenting sponsor, RTI International, have been bringing this thing to you for years, both online and in person. Spoiler alert. Also, our live broadcast sponsor, Dubljevic Partners, who have made this possible throughout the last year and a half of live online RTP 180. So big thank you to Dubljevic Partners. No affiliation implied. Now, here at RTP 180, we are coming to you normally from the frontier. And we would, hey, I missed that part. Here at RTP 180, we are having speakers. That's what we do. We're going to have 5 speakers. They're each going to be presenting for 5 minutes, give or take, and have 5-ish minutes of Q&A. If they go over that 5 minutes, you will hear a bell, a dog will salivate, an angel will get its wings, and that's their signal to wrap it up so we can get to your questions and answers. Now, very important thing for your questions and answers. If you have a question for one of our panelists, please drop that into Zoom chat or Facebook chat as soon as you think of it. That way, when we reach the Q&A section, you will have questions to answer, and it won't be awkward for all of us. So if you have a question, please drop that into the appropriate chat. You can also tweet at us at Frontier RTP. You can hashtag RTP180 if hashtagging is your thing. Our social media team will be checking all the socials for your comments and feedback throughout the show. Now, normally, this is where I was going here a second ago. Normally I'm coming to you from the Frontier, which is the region's only free, pause for dramatic effect, co-working facility located, if not in the heart of their triangle, at least in the portal vein. Now, you can stop by, post up, grab a desk. You can get conference rooms. There's also space for rent at the Frontier. It's a beautiful facility. If you haven't checked it out and you happen to be in the triangle area, please do so. You can actually come inside now. That's kind of cool. We also do things outside. We have food truck rodeos, yoga, pet type things. We have the Box Yard, a brand new facility made out of shipping containers. The Box Yard will be hosting Soapbox Comedy, a PG-13 comedy show at the Box Yard. Check out the Frontier website for more information. Oxygen. Need more of it up here. All right, ladies and gentlemen, our subject today is artificial intelligence. That's why you're here. We've got 5 of our experts here to talk to you about AI. And without further ado, let's bring on our first speaker of the evening. He's an ENT in training at UNC with big dreams to further integrate computer vision into medicine. Please welcome Andrew Prince.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. My name is Andrew Prince. I'm honored, excited, and partly still in shock that I was offered a chance to share a passion of mine with you all this evening. Quick disclosure, I'm still a pretty fresh MD, only 3 years out of medical school, and I'm here in the Triangle as an otolaryngology head and neck surgery resident, aka ENT at UNC. In parallel, I'm a co-founder and CEO of a startup digital health company, LiRA. So my experience in AI and medicine is a little limited, but it's quickly growing. And if I'm anything, I'm unrelentlessly curious with my current fascination towards the advancement of medical technology. Tonight, I'm going to quickly share how I see AI and computer vision intersecting with medicine and close with my first attempt to push the technological bounds. Now, it may come as no surprise, but as surgeons, we love to operate. However, our ability to operate has been forever hindered by the best tech of the day. And not too long ago, bad weather even impacted surgical schedules as operating rooms were literally built with a glass dome ceiling on the top hospital floor. Fortunately, today, though, we have electrically powered lights, which are definitely outperforming carefully arranged windows and mirrors. Now, even better for people, especially like us who like to look down dark bodily holes, modern endoscopes produce high resolution, real-time video, allowing identification of some of the earliest, incredibly smallest pathologies. But here's where I start to see a contemporary limitation. There's obviously a vocal cord growth that needs intervention, but how confident are you that tumor cells don't extend beyond what is clearly, perhaps to a trained eye, concerning? Now, to unpack that a bit more, here's a quick 50,000-foot overview of the theory behind surgical oncology. Now, one, you got to take the tumor out, and two, it's with the goal of extending the patient's life duration and / their health quality. So if a theoretically brown cancer is growing in panel A, well, we can easily cut that out like in panel B, leaving a wound behind that we can certainly close. But what about those residual islands of disease? They get left behind only to become a huge headache in a matter of weeks to months. Now, in medical school, I worked on fluorescence-guided surgery. How can we make tumors effectively grow so it's even easier for us to cut them out? Now, down column 1, you're looking at a tumor resection bed as we still see it in the OR today, albeit in a mouse. Now, down column 2, just take my word for it, everything that's in color is 100% cancerous cells. Columns 3 and 4, though, we're using special fluorescent probes and cameras that picks up these glowing tumors. Now, my old mentors continue today leading the field in developing these fluorescent probes to identify microscopic nests of disease that would invariably become a cancer survivor's worst nightmare. So here's where I start to try and come in. Next slide, please. I have a fascination towards integrating computer vision and AI to evaluate optical data, to better digest it into something even more meaningful. And my brain races thinking about how the combination of these fluorescent probes used to augment tumor detection as well as normal anatomical structures could be better understood with an AI system that delivers an interactive, augmentative reality-based dashboard that would inform the operative surgeon in real time. If you couple that with rapid advancements in surgical robotics, we're quickly headed to a future where surgical disease management only becomes better, cheaper, more effective, more curative, with less long-term side effects and morbidity resulting outcomes. So to that end, and transitioning to a close, I want to share with you all my entry project into this healthcare AI space. At LiRA, we're developing an AI-based video-to-speech lip reading software for voiceless individuals. Now, the type of voicelessness we're addressing follows a life-saving breathing procedure that precludes speech during the most critical of life moments. Once voiceless, these individuals are forced to write, gesture, and effectively play charades to communicate. And this affects over 1 million Americans a year. But LiRA's promise of immediate, non-invasive voice restoration looks to change the paradigm of voiceless care. We see LiRA being integrated seamlessly into a hospital workflow. And using a smart device, a clinician, or really anyone accesses our web-based app and faces their device towards the voiceless individual. The device's camera captures patient lip movements, and that video data is then sent to the cloud for processing, where our proprietary algorithm instantly translates what would have been a lost message into speech. And we're hopeful to have our entry model available by the end of next year. Now, rounding out with a shameless plug, if anything I said excites you and you'd like to help us towards our short-term lip reading goal, please pull out your phone and scan this QR code or navigate to www.liraglobal.com/liptrain on either a mobile or desktop device. Through this platform, anyone, anywhere can help provide fundamental training video data needed to build our lip reading platform. Literally, in just 2 minutes, you can make a big difference towards our goal, and we really need this data from everyone ASAP. We're having a demo that we're building for the Riot program locally on July 27th, and for that release to happen, we need 200 more participants, and I'm certain we can hit that tonight with your help. So if you're willing, we'd love your participation. We'd love it even more if you shared it with a friend. If you'd like to keep up with LiRA's development, you can follow us on social media channels, and please check out our website at liraglobal.com. Lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't ask, but if you think you have any way that could help me towards my goal, I would love to hear from you. I'm at andrew.prince@liraglobal.com. Thank you all for your time tonight. I'd love to answer any questions.
All right, great stuff there from Andrew Prince. Bet you didn't think you'd get a chance to be guinea pigs in a video voice replacement service, but that's the type of stuff you get by coming here to RTP 180. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get your questions put into Zoom chat, put into Facebook chat, sent to us on Twitter. First question, Andrew, is coming from social media. That question is, what changes in video technology have made this possible today where it wouldn't have been possible a few years ago?
Yeah, I think really what our platform is based on are some of the most recent advancements in computer vision, machine learning, and natural language processing. I mean, those technologies and the science behind it is one thing, but so is the hardware that's required. It's an incredible amount of processing power that this gets out of my scope of knowledge, but towards my CTOs, where you need things like CPUs and GPUs that can do more and more powerful computing. And I think that's just something that has been recently democratized in a way that the common individual could dream big. And so we tap into the Azure network, and we're actually in the Microsoft for Startups partner program, which has provided a lot of in-kind computational credits. And so it's all of these changes kind of coming together that's making a dream like this possible.
All right, next question coming in from social media from Kate. The question is, the voices that are produced by LiRA, what do they sound like?
Ultimately, right now, we're still pretty low fidelity. We're just doing very generic voice. Long term, we would love to offer personalized voice. We take care of many head and neck cancer patients that require their actual voice box taken out. And I can dream big imagining how we could fingerprint their normal or natural native voice and replace that electronically downstream. So lots of dreaming still to do, but we're really hammering out that whole video to speech technology in the short term. Of course, the QR image, I can see that in the chat, can be shared as the website address, www.liraglobal.com/liptrain. You can also find that linked off of our website.
Awesome. And the wonderful Miranda just put that into Zoom chat as well. Next question coming in from social media. If computers have advanced to the point where they can read lips and replace a voice, what other things can be done with computer vision aided by AI?
Yeah, this is where I start to get really excited. Like the idea of being able to resect a tumor and be able to evaluate the tumor intraoperatively and then pass that data off to a pathologist who is ultimately on a different floor from us, that is fundamental in making diagnoses. It's that interplay that we'll be able to do that I think it will accelerate our ability to practice medicine. I'm so excited to see what the next 10 years hold.
All right, great stuff, ladies and gentlemen. Wherever you happen to be, big virtual hand for Andrew Prince. Thank you, Andrew. Awesome, some great stuff coming from the medical community. Also, the Internet of Things community here in the Triangle continues to bring the mail. All right, ladies and gentlemen, up next, she's a fellow with the London-based Royal Society of Arts, focusing on inclusion and technology since 1999. Please welcome our second speaker, Phaedra Boinodiris.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with you today. Before I get started, just a couple of notes about me. So I am a North Carolina native with a background in the gaming industry. I started years ago a company with my sister called womengamers.com, and then ended up leading IBM's serious games practice. I actually became very interested in artificial intelligence when we started to combine it with play in order to do some really, really cool things in video games. But in 2018, I decided to take a pause in my work when the news hit about Cambridge Analytica's misuse of data and AI. It just made me really, really angry. So I'm actually now pursuing a PhD in AI and ethics. And via this PhD, it's actually through the University College Dublin, but via this PhD, I've been learning a lot about what I'm calling, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good obviously being the use of artificial intelligence to do very, very good things in the world. Cambridge Analytica's misuse was an example of the bad. But the rest, and in fact, the rest of this talk is really going to be about the ugly, when organizations who even have the very best of intentions could cause potential individual or societal harm due to their use of AI. And actually now my current day job at IBM is to actually help our clients be more responsible stewards of artificial intelligence. And so while the idea of artificial intelligence has been around for decades, it wasn't actually until about 10 years ago that the race to utilize AI became really, really serious. In that 10 years, AI has spread across all industries, becoming really embedded in everyday business. In fact, AI is directly affecting you today. right? It's determining things like what percentage interest rate you're going to get on that loan, whether you get that job that you applied to online, whether your kid gets into that university that they applied to, and more. And so there's actually a couple of things that keep me up at night. One is that oftentimes people have no idea that an AI is actually being used to make these really, really big decisions about them. Or two, they make the mistake of thinking that because it's an AI and not a fallible human, that somehow the decisions that are being made are somehow going to be morally or ethically squeaky clean and they don't need to worry about it. But it's actually, again, we fallible humans that curate the data that is being used to train these algorithms that we really need to be concerned about. And there are many, many examples in the press today demonstrating how our human bias ends up being calcified within these kinds of systems, affecting things like recruiting, lending, even things like sentencing. So what this chart that you're looking at describes are, the 5 kinds of questions that one really needs to ask when thinking about whether an AI is indeed trustworthy, whether it can elicit trust. You've got to ask yourself, right? The question, is this fair? Is it fair towards me? Is it explainable? Would I be able to ask questions like, what's the data lineage and provenance that was being used to train such a system? Is it tamper-proof? Is it accountable? May I see metadata associated with this AI model? And indeed, does it protect my data? If you go to the next chart, please. What I'm describing to you, earning trust in artificial intelligence, is not a technological challenge. Repeat after me. It is not a technological challenge. It is a socio-technological challenge. And because it's a socio-technological challenge, it requires a holistic approach. This is not something that can be solved just with technology alone. In fact, what you need to do is really think about one's organization very holistically. You need to think about things like, how diverse is my team of data scientists? How many minorities are represented there? How many women are represented there? Is the data that I'm curating truly representative of all different kinds of groups of humans where it may be making decisions that directly affect them? And oftentimes there's a lot of conversation and chatter within organizations about things like, concern over liability, but at the same time, what's underneath the covers are things like not enough women and minorities being retained in the ranks, right? No history of things like business resource groups. So diversity is something that's really, really key to consider. Establishing a culture that really embraces the idea of being responsible curators of AI, doing design thinking sessions right early on in the process, where your team, your multidisciplinary, multi-stakeholder team can start to think about what are potential unintended consequences of the approach. What are, again, unintended things such that one could design in order to mitigate for any harm. Doing that early on in the process is key. So that's culture. Then things like tooling, right? There's all kinds of tools that are available out there that can help you do things like mine for bias within a data set, or help to render the data set explainable for different groups of people, establishing things like automated governance. And a lot of these tools have been donated to the open source community. Do take a look at the ones that IBM has donated via the Linux Foundation. And then lastly, this idea of, not the next chart yet. And lastly is this idea of governance, right? The idea of what are you going to publish with respect to what you're going to say to the market, as well as your own employees with respect to the standards that you're going to stand by, right? And where this is all moving to is this idea of like a good housekeeping seal of approval. There's organizations, for example, like the IEEE and others, international organizations that are looking to establish these kinds of standards for AI models. So if you go to the next chart, what I want you to think about is, if I've inspired you in any way, you may be thinking like, okay, I hear what she's saying, but what can I do about it? What can I do right now where I'm at? I may feel like I'm not in a position of power within my org to do anything. One thing you can do is demand trustworthy AI and advocate for education about it. Think about these kinds of things that I'm describing to you. Why are we only teaching this to those computer science students who are self-categorizing themselves as coders? This should be taught to medical students, our future legislators, to high school students. So if any of this is of interest to you, reach out to me, join forces, and thank you again for your time.
All right, big thanks to Phaedra Boinodiris for some AI knowledge. Now it's time for your questions coming to us through Zoom chat, Facebook chat, social media. First question comes to us from Zoom chat from Bruce. Could you address synthetic data for training in a trust context? Are there any special additional issues involved with that synthetic data?
Yes, and in fact, we have here locally a fantastic company that specializes in synthetic data. So big shout out to our friends at DivePlane. If you're unfamiliar with this group, they are absolutely amazing. I think that the key to think about when you're, a little bit of background for those who don't know what synthetic data is. This is the idea of if you're thinking about establishing data privacy as one of your tenets, in lieu of asking individuals to say, yep, I agree, I sign off to have my data being used in an AI model, this idea of synthesizing data is, I'm not going to use your direct patient data as an example. Instead, I'm going to go to a group and actually have this data be synthesized and use it within an AI model. I think the key is, again, to make sure that you're choosing the right kinds of partners that have established governance with respect to how they synthesize the data, how they establish metadata associated with that data set, so you can understand how it was crafted, how representative that synthetic data is. But again, DivePlane is a wonderful group to look out and ask if you've got any more questions about that.
All right, our next question is coming to us from Mike in Zoom chat. Does the lack of introspection by an AI DNN always make fairness, understandably, robustness, transparency, and even privacy impossible, or is that something that can be obtained?
I'm a hopeful optimist. That's why I mentioned culture and the fact that it's a socio-technological challenge. Yes, on the desperate need for introspection. Yes, yes, yes. And that's why I really like the way that these tech ethics by design sessions, these workshops have been crafted, right? Because it walks people through a journey who may not be used to being introspective or indeed particularly empathetic towards other groups, and just getting people to think like, who's not in the room with you? Who's not being considered? What could potential unintended harm be? And how do you design in order to protect against something like that? I think until we build that muscle memory at large, using these kinds of techniques, I think, is really key. And that's why I'm advocating for, like, let's get this into high schools. Let's get more kids and, other students who don't self-categorize as coders using these techniques and thinking in this way.
All right, and our next question comes from Fillmore in Zoom chat. How would automated governance work with neural networks?
Oh, goodness. So automated governance, the way that we're looking towards crafting automated governance is this idea of, think of it kind of like a Weight Watchers app for AI. Basically, prompts. We actually developed a tool called Scaled DS that uses the CRISP DM framework. And what it does is it gives you prompts along the AI model lifecycle with respect to what you need to do next. And we really took a hard look, especially at the ethics components and the idea of culture per the last question that was asked, so that you're really prompting developers and engineers to be thinking about what uncommon stakeholders do we need to have in the room in order to be thinking about the AI model in a way that's truly holistic, right? And so having that kind of automated governance tool to do these kinds of prompts all along your AI life cycle, I think is really interesting. So we'll see with respect to, you know, the difference of how you might approach it with neural networks, but it's early days still, so TBD.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, big hand for Phaedra Boinodiris. Dropping some knowledge about AI ethics, something we should all be paying attention to. If you've got additional questions, Phaedra may answer them in Zoom chat. Who knows? I'm not her boss. Up next, though, we have our third speaker of the evening. He's an associate professor of philosophy, science, technology, and society, or STS, at NC State. Please welcome Dr. Veljko Dubljevic.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for your attention. And I'm happy to talk about ethics of AI and more specifically, ethics of autonomous vehicles. So this is a really complex topic, as Phaedra has noted, and there's many issues that need to be covered and not enough time for that. So that's why you will be having access to my published papers and works in progress, where my colleagues and I have been trying to tackle with these very complex topics. Some of them are, how do we implement AI or autonomous vehicles technology fairly? Who should be held accountable? And how do we implement ethics into the decision-making of machines? So we've done interviews with stakeholders, so semi-professional and professional drivers, because they are on the receiving end of this technology. We asked them what they think are the ethical issues that autonomous vehicles will have to solve, and what are the societal impacts of this technology. Some are more optimistic, whereas others are vehemently opposed, and those are the professional drivers. The prominent themes are that autonomous vehicles will have a significant impact on society, and that we should be working together, not only the industry and the working population, but also the educational establishment, as well as the government, to deal with these issues and find ways to accommodate them prior to major disruptions. The second paper that I would like to cover with you is the media coverage of AI and autonomous vehicles. My colleagues and I wanted to know when this will come into the policy focus, and this is increasingly being reported on. So ethical issues in ethics of AI and autonomous vehicles are being reported on an increasing basis. And the issues that are being covered are, as was mentioned, prejudice, privacy, transparency, job loss, which is very important, and AI decision-making. This last one, hopefully we'll have time to touch upon, because AI is making decisions that are inherently ethics loaded. So whether it's programmed to make ethical decisions or not, people are affected by those decisions. We also reported some recommendations to the public that the print media is actually forwarding, and this is that ethical guidelines need to be developed, that there needs to be more public debate about these issues. So luckily we have this event. And that we need to have transparency and to empower ethics committees or ethicists to actually have some say in the way the industry and the government is dealing with these issues. This is a third paper that, so we know that ethical issues are highly complex. One person cannot solve them. And we used the multi-criteria decision analysis with a panel of experts from political science, engineering, computer science, ethics, or organizational behavior to question which kinds of implementation strategies for AVs will be harmful or helpful. So if we do nothing, this will produce the most harm. If we limit the use of autonomous vehicles for groups or organizations that will maintain and operate them, this will bring about the least amount of harm based on the criteria that we came up in this formalized systematic exercise. Again, I cannot go into all of the harms, but the link is available in this presentation and will be available in the chat. We also assess the benefits in terms of which type of implementation policy will bring about most economic and other kinds of benefits. And again, we have found that a regulated fleet-owned imposition of autonomous vehicles would bring about the most social benefits. We also calculated the harm benefit trade-off. And this is an exercise that we are not saying or sitting as experts and saying the government should act upon this. We are saying we are providing this questionnaire, which should be applied by independent experts and researchers and by governments on the federal, state, and local level in order to implement this technology ethically and safely. Now, a few words about decision-making of autonomous vehicles. You may or may not be aware of experiments which are trying to implement utilitarianism, which is a type of ethical theory, into autonomous vehicles. And I fear, and many others fear, that this is misguided because human moral judgment is not limited to just utilitarianism. So I suggested using a more complex model, which is more akin to how we humans make moral decisions, in order to deal with issues such as malicious intent. Let me give you an example. If we implement utilitarianism, it is just a question of numbers of people who would be saved. So if we save 5 people versus 1 person, hooray, the utilitarian answer is correct. But what happens if those people are malicious, let's say terrorists, right? And they want to kill that 1 person. So this is the kind of a blind spot that we're hoping a different approach to the ethical decision-making of autonomous vehicles will result. Thank you for your attention.
All right, cutting edge stuff here from Dr. Dubljevic. Now time for your questions in Zoom chat, in Facebook Live, wherever you happen to have them. First question is coming from Jashelle on social media. She asks, there's already kind of a assumption or framework in place for assigning responsibility to incidents caused by human drivers. What is the biggest way of thinking or the biggest part of our legal system that's going to have to change to adopt a similar model for autonomous drivers?
So first of all, I'm not a legal scholar, so we have to take what I say with a caveat. What I foresee happening is that we either have a system in which it is fleet controlled, and then we have a corporate actor that is responsible for whatever happens for those accidents, or we have a more haphazard system in which there will be more complications. Now, I do not know which kind of a scenario of implementation of autonomous vehicles will happen, but luckily we have 50 plus states where we can experiment with types of implementation. I'm pretty sure that we will have states that are more regulation friendly and other states which are more likely to impose the status quo. So time will tell whether our predictions are correct or not.
Excellent. Next question comes to us from Mike in Zoom chat. He asks, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, do autonomous vehicles need ethics, or do they just need not to cause mayhem, death, or damage?
I would say that they do need ethics because if we limit the whole discussion on safety, the safety parameters can and will be used by malicious actors. You may or may not remember that vehicles have been used as weapons in the past, with people ramming into crowds of protesters or using vehicles to further their causes. I am afraid that if we do not implement ethics in autonomous vehicles, that will be exploited. It's a vulnerability which will be exploited.
All right, next question comes to us from Kevin on social media. Do you envision a future in which there is a single recognized and vetted AI ethics algorithm, or do you envision a future where there are multiple competing algorithms and the brand of algorithm or the brand of vehicle you use determines the ethical behavior of your vehicle?
So the problem with ethics is that it's highly complex. The human brain is the most powerful computational machine we have. And we can apply our creativity and computational power from different tasks in different task domains. So what I foresee is that we'll have ethical algorithms for a constrained domain such as autonomous vehicles, And we'll have ethical algorithms for constrained domains such as cybersecurity and so on and so forth. So in a nutshell, yes, there will be competition because the domains will demand different solutions.
All right, and our last question is coming to you from Chuck on social media. Chuck asks, what is the area of autonomous vehicle ethics research that has you the most interested right now?
So probably I would say is the application of autonomous vehicles in urban environments. So the testing of autonomous vehicles has been happening in highways and so on and so forth. And we can see that trucks can navigate a route without much problems, but it gets infinitely more complex if we foresee an autonomous vehicle driving, let's say a taxi driving people in downtown Raleigh. People are more chaotic, people make different decisions, and this will increase the complexity of decision-making to levels that the simple AI that we currently use cannot handle.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, some great knowledge on AI and ethics from Dr. Veljko Dubljevic. Give him a big hand wherever you happen to be. I'm doing it here from San Francisco. All right, the train rolls on, ladies and gentlemen. We now move on to our fourth speaker of the evening. He's an expert spatial data scientist specializing in creating geospatial-related multi-tier data management systems. Please welcome James Rineer.
So thanks. It's my pleasure to be here and present on this topic. I'll be describing a few artificial intelligence, machine learning, modeling examples, but really primarily thinking about these examples with a focus on the data needed for those efforts. As we've already mentioned a couple times, AI ML modeling takes a lot of data. And to get that data, increasingly we're needing to use synthetic versions of that data. So next slide, please. So I think a lot of people would agree, it's increasingly easy for us to go out and find data for modeling, but in many cases it remains extremely difficult to find large enough data sets. And I'll also add maybe data sets that don't include certain biases in order for us to train our AI ML models appropriately. So I think what we're seeing in lots of different domains, that in order to best build and train our models, we increasingly need to leverage synthesized or synthetic data. And these data really can be a lot of different things. They can be data that is completely made up at random, or as we have been doing a lot of, we build statistical data sets that are models of real data sets. I think also what people are starting to realize is that these synthetic data sets eventually have equal or greater value to the real data. For one, synthetic data set, we can create any amount of that data that we want to. And secondly, use of synthetic data is maybe an obvious choice for removing some of the barriers for privacy and sensitivity over those original data sets. And this can dramatically speed up access to research and those types of things. So along these lines, at RTI, we've been building a product called SynthPop, synthetic data for machine learning. SynthPop basically is a geospatially explicit, statistically accurate representation of every single person and every single household in the US. It's something like, if you've heard the term digital twins, kind of like a digital twin for every single one of us. We build this data set from the publicly available American Community Survey data, and it's updated every single year. So the data set contains over 100 million household points and over 300 million person records with socio-demographic and economic characteristics that are accurate to the information that the Census Bureau provides us. And it also includes an overlay of assignments for kids in those households, so likely schools, and adults in those households, so likely workplaces. So it gives us a bit of a temporal component for various analyses. So in the rest of the slides, I'm just going to cover three quick examples of population modeling using these types of synthetic data. So in the first case, I'm going to talk a little bit about a CDC-funded project that dealt with healthcare-associated infections. So these are the types of usually somewhat rare cases of infection that you might get in the hospital. The goal really here is to try and understand how acquired healthcare associated infections might be transmitted within a facility, and as well how they might be transmitted in the community that are associated with those hospital facilities. In order to do this, we build up a virtual laboratory, what we called it, that is comprised of the synthetic population data set. And we add to that synthetic population data models, machine learning models built on top of the sensitive electronic health records from the UNC system. We augment the synthetic population with different covariates and predictors for outcomes. Those synthetic population records are put into what we call microsimulations or agent-based models, where we can move the population forward, maybe it's day by day or month by month, and see how their disease status might change in those hospitals. And that gives us usually what we treat as like a baseline. And then we come in and run that model again with various interventions, try to look at the delta between the intervention and that baseline scenario. So this allows us to evaluate different policy interventions or other types of interventions that might be envisioned. So next slide, please. I'll talk a little bit about another example where we want to use the synthetic population to be able to combine data. So 5 minutes already? Okay. So in this case, we looked at the NIEHS national data set that has a measure for body mass index. In a very similar way, we build a predictive model on that data. We move it onto the synthetic population, and we start to look at clusters, for the significant clusters for higher obesity. And we can start to imagine how we might intervene in select places given limited resources. And the last slide, or next slide, one more. And so in the last case, we're also applying this to some recent work with child well-being. We're looking at synthetic population because it's geospatial. We're looking at augmenting it both with where the households are and proximity to risk factors such as crime and other things, as well as the risk factors that come from the sociodemographic characteristics within that household to build predictive models where risk might be higher for 0 to 3-year-olds. So those are three quick examples. I think the takeaway is that machine learning, AI take a lot of data, and synthetic data is required in a lot of cases, especially for when you want to look at population-wide, entire US types of models. Thanks.
All right. Great stuff there from James Rineer. Now it's time for your questions. Drop them into Zoom chat, drop them into Facebook chat. We will get them answered. First question comes from Allison on social media. Can you give an example in each case? One, where is synthetic data going to be more useful? And in another, where would real world data be more useful?
Yeah, I think it's a tricky question because in a lot of our cases, what we do is we take limited amounts of real world data and we model it so that we can create more voluminous amounts of synthetic data. So I think models built completely on synthetic data probably aren't realistic. There's no real base for them. So I think it's really a hybrid in most cases. You need some amount of real data, but oftentimes computationally that may not be enough, or you need to augment it in some way. So this is where the synthetic data approach allows us to do bigger models, maybe with more certainty around them.
All right, next question comes from Laura in Zoom chat. What sort of assumptions do you use when creating the synthetic data?
So some of the assumptions, again, I mentioned we build this up from the publicly available Census Bureau's American Community Survey. So we're using all the same assumptions and approaches that the Census Bureau has there. Census Bureau releases roughly a 5% sample of all of the data that we fill out on our forms, and our methods expand that to 100% coverage for the entire US. We have to make some assumptions about where those households that we've just created, though, land within the census block groups. So it is a geospatial product, and some of the assumptions we're making are that the dots fall in places where population density is highest. So we randomly place points in areas that have higher population density until we use up the data set. So there are definitely some assumptions there. Hopefully that answers your question.
All right, next question comes from Bruce in Zoom chat. For your geospatial component, have you seen any contamination of the real world data occurring via GNSS or GPS jamming and spoofing? And if so, how do you clean data that may have that jamming in it?
I have not seen that in the data sets that we've worked with. Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that one. I have not seen it.
And then just kind of a follow-on question, in general, how do you account for errors or uncleanliness in your source data so that it contaminates the synthetic data as little as possible?
Yeah, I mean, this is a good one. And we do find concerns with the real data. Maybe a good example might be data scraped from social media, which probably everybody agree would contain some amount of bias. If that bias can be measured, then you can incorporate weights, changes, manipulations to the process that creates the synthetic versions to try and adjust for them.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, big hand for James Rineer.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, James. And we are now coming up on our last speaker of the evening. She has been leading the National Toxicology Program Interagency Center for the Evaluation of Alternative Toxicological Methods, or NICE ATM, which is the same thing I say about Wells Fargo. Please welcome Dr. Nicole Kleinstreuer.
Thanks so much, Wade. And thanks all of you for tuning in. I do have the privilege of heading up NICE ATM, which is not a friendly cash machine, but is the US federal resource for alternatives to animal testing. And it's located here in RTP within NIEHS, but we provide support to 17 different federal agencies. On a personal note, I am a Raleigh native. I've lived in many places around the world, but I'm always drawn back to this amazing area. And my husband and I are super excited to be raising our 2 kids here, one of whom just made her appearance a few weeks ago. So if anything I say makes no sense, just chalk it up to extreme sleep deprivation. Okay, so I'm going to start us off with a short history lesson. So this is a car in 1928, and this is a car in 2021. Hopefully my next car. This is a plane in 1928. This is a plane in 2021. And this is how we assessed chemicals for safety or toxicity in 1928. And this is how we do it in 2021 by and large. So we inject or feed rats with various amounts of chemicals and we wait and see what happens. And then we extrapolate that to humans. So I'm going to break down the problem here into about 4 parts. You know, there's a number of issues with relying on such an outdated system, but for a long time it was all we had, and it has provided adequate protection so far. But I'm going to show you today that with recent developments over the past couple of decades in computational power and AI, we actually have the opportunity to be much smarter about how we determine whether chemicals are safe and at what levels, and in a way that's actually relevant to humans. So first part of the problem is that there is substantial evidence for contributions of environmental chemicals to various diseases. So there's been linkages proven between drinking water contaminants and flame retardants to things like neurological effects. Certain pesticides have been linked to cancers, perfluorinated compounds, PFAS, linked to metabolic diseases, and the list goes on and on. The second issue is that there are just far too many chemicals to test with traditional methods. So best estimate right now is that there is at least 80,000 chemicals in commerce. New compounds are entering the market every single day. And really only a small fraction of those have been tested in traditional animal-based studies. And those take years to complete and tens of thousands up to millions of dollars. So it's just not feasible from a resource standpoint to test all the chemicals that we're exposed to in animal studies. The third issue is that animal models are neither reproducible nor particularly predictive of the human condition. So we have many examples from the pharmaceutical industry, some of which are summarized in this book by NPR science correspondent Richard Harris, which I highly recommend. It's excellent. It's called How Sloppy Science Creates Worthless Cures, Crushes Hope, and Wastes Billions. So nothing dramatic about that title, but it really provides a nice summary of a lot of these issues. And we know that, more than 90% of drugs that enter human clinical trials actually fail despite having positive results in preclinical animal tests. And most of these drugs fail for reasons of toxicity and poor efficacy that actually weren't detected in animals. And then you can also think about the flip side of it. So imagine how many promising drugs are actually dropped due to toxicity in animals that may be irrelevant to humans. Aspirin is a great example. It's a WHO essential medicine, but it causes birth defects in a wide range of animals and causes cancer in some animals. So it would have never reached the market if it had been tested by today's methods. And then the fourth sort of most pressing issue is that at the end of the day, human and animals are different. We're not 150-pound rats. Our biology is different, often in the exact genetic and metabolic signaling pathways that determine disease onset and progression. So if you think about diseases like diabetes or stroke or heart failure, Alzheimer's, ALS, cystic fibrosis, depression, obesity, many cancers, what do they all have in common? Well, they've all been cured in mice, but there's no cure in sight in humans. So what do I propose as the solution here? So the solution is what I like to call augmented intelligence. So I didn't coin this. It's a concept that was first published in a series of seminal papers in the late 50s and early 60s. And it's this idea of using computers and the full technological toolbox that we have at our fingertips to support human intellect. So it's really leveraging big data and computational tools to join the techniques of machine learning, artificial intelligence, which is what most people think of when you say AI, natural language processing, mathematical modeling, data analytics, et cetera, to enhance and support human intellect. So how are we already using these computational tools and information technology and cognitive algorithms to complement and enhance human intelligence and build better models of human biology that can be applied in the field of chemical safety testing? The first example that I have on the slide here is what's called QSAR modeling. So this is quantitative structure activity relationships, where we use chemical structures to predict toxicity. So we have a couple thousand chemicals that have been tested that we know something about, and we can use those to train machine learning models that can identify complex patterns between chemical molecular features and the toxicity endpoint. And then we can apply those to predict the toxicity of chemicals that have never been tested. And QSAR models have been successfully built and applied in a variety of different endpoints like endocrine disruption or skin sensitization or acute systemic toxicity. So that's one really exciting example. The next example is what's called high throughput screening. So using robots to rapidly test thousands of chemicals against hundreds, if not thousands, of human genetic, molecular, and cellular targets. These targets can be computationally mapped to different parts of the body, like your liver, your reproductive system, your brain. And then the data can be used to predict which chemicals might cause different types of toxicity at which exposure levels. And then the final example that I'll walk you through is what's called tissue chips. So here we have stem cells and tissue samples taken directly from patients that can be used to grow mini organs that use microfluidics and physical stressors to mimic human organs. So for example, human lung on chips are being used to test therapeutics for COVID-19 in ways that are much more relevant to human disease than the available animal models, because the animals really just don't get sick the way people do. So these so-called organs on chips can be linked and combined with computational models, and someday we will have a fully simulated human that can revolutionize the way we test chemicals and drugs for safety and efficacy and provide groundbreaking insights into human biology. So I'll stop there. Thanks very much, and I look forward to your questions.
All right, great stuff there. Point of order, I am in fact a 150-pound rat. No, I'm kidding. I'm much closer to 200 pounds. First question comes to us from Bruce in Zoom chat. Are tissue chips useful to informing the computer models, and can you use the computer models to direct validation studies using those tissue chips?
Yes, absolutely, Bruce. I mean, that's a great question, and it sounds like you maybe know something about this field. So, yeah, that's, I think, exactly the future that we're working towards. So using computational models to predict and parameterize some of the systems that then can be used to test things like reference compounds that we know a lot about, and then that iteratively, the data can be fed back in to improve those computational models.
All right, second question coming to us from Holly on social media. Are there any organs that are further along into being put on chips and useful, and are there ones that are much more challenging to do that to?
Yes, that's also a great question. So it really sort of depends on how easy it is to sample different types of tissues, right? So the field of induced pluripotent stem cells has really revolutionized the concept of building tissue chips, because you can take samples and then you can de-differentiate them and then take them down different lineages. But things like the gut is a lot easier to sample than, for example, the brain. And the complexity of the organ also weighs in terms of how far along the technology is in terms of actually being able to mimic its physiological state in the human body. So I would say, like, having gut organoids, liver organoids, skin models, those are all really far along. But in terms of sort of the more complex organs like the heart and the brain, that's still a lot of work to be done, but a lot of really exciting developments occurring every day in those fields.
Next question comes to us from Gina in Zoom chat. What is needed to bring augmented intelligence to the forefront of safety testing in place of animal testing?
Thanks, Gina. So I think what's needed is awareness. So events like this are fantastic, like getting our message out to a lot of different people in a lot of different fields. I think funding is crucial. I think regulatory vision and leadership. So as I mentioned, we work with a lot of different federal agencies, and the EPA, for example, has been really transformative in their commitment towards moving towards a future that does away with animal testing. And they've been really, really supportive in a lot of projects in terms of trying to bring augmented intelligence into their regulatory decision-making frameworks. So I think having those stakeholders as part of the conversation from the ground up is really crucial.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, big hand for Dr. Nicole Kleinstreuer. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes RTP 180 for July 2021 on the subject of artificial intelligence. We do thank you for joining us, and we thank you for all of you who have joined us throughout our online adventure, because we're back in person next month. That's right, August. Digital marketing is the subject, and we will be back at the Frontier, live and in person, with beer samples, with popcorn, with people in the same room. We will also be streaming live on PBS NC, the artist formerly known as UNC TV. For those of you who can't join us, whether you're not ready to go outside yet, or whether you've been joining us at RTP 180 from areas outside of the Triangle, you'll be able to tune in on PBS NC to catch all of the action. I will be there in person. Amanda will be there in person. It'll be a big, happy get together. Digital marketing will be the subject. Be sure to tune in. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of RTP 180, presented by RTI International, with our streaming sponsor, Dual Boot Partners, I have been your MC, coming to you all the way from San Francisco, California today, Wade Minter, saying thank you for joining us. We will see you in person in August. Until then, stay safe and enjoy your summer. Good night, everybody.
Closing time, open all the doors and let you out into the world. Closing time, turn all of the lights on over every boy and every girl. Closing time, one last call for alcohol, so finish your whiskey or beer. Closing time, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. I know